before. Nobody understands Carol. Carol slowly opened her eyes. Her head hurt. She closed her eyes again. A man said something. What was it? "Carol," she heard. "Carol, can you hear me?" "I can hear you," Carol said, "but I don't want to open my eyes. My head hurts. Who are you?" "It's me, Giorgio Rinaldi, the conductor of the orchestra." "Mr. Rinaldi?" Carol opened her eyes again. Her head didn't hurt so much this time. "What are you doing in my bedroom?" she asked angrily. "What's happening?" "This isn't your bedroom," said Mr. Rinaldi. "It's a hospital in Prague. You had an accident yesterday. Can you remember anything about it?" Suddenly, Carol remembered everything. The old town, the Christmas trees in the shop windows, Christmas presents, Jan. Jan! She sat up. "Jan! Where's Jan?" she asked Mr. Rinaldi. "Please, Mrs. Vlach," said a woman quietly, "don't get excited. Lie down again." Carol turned her head. It hurt again. Near the door of the room, she saw a woman in a white coat. A doctor. "But I must see Jan," Carol said. "Where is he? I must find him. I can't... Oh, dear." She put her hand to her head. "Who's Jan?" the doctor asked Mr. Rinaldi quietly. "Her husband," he answered. He took Carol's hand. "Listen. Your husband is coming. We told him about the accident. He's on a plane from London now." "On a plane? Why? He's here in Prague. I saw him in the street, near the old town. I called out to him, and he saw me, but he didn't stop. He just walked away from me. Please find him, please. I must talk to him, I must." The doctor moved nearer to the bed. "Jan is coming soon, Mrs. Vlach," she said. "Please don't get excited. It's not good for you. Now, lie down again and close your eyes. You must sleep, and I know you're feeling very tired." Carol lay down and closed her eyes. The doctor was right. She was tired. But why didn't they listen? Why didn't they understand? Jan was in Prague, and she must find him, talk to him. The doctor looked at Mr. Rinaldi and spoke very quietly. "Let's leave her now, please. She needs to sleep. You can come back later." Mr. Rinaldi and the doctor left the room. They closed the door quietly and then looked at Carol through the window in the door. "She's going to be all right," said the doctor. "She just needs to sleep for a time. There's nothing wrong with her."
"Yes, there is,"
said Mr. Rinaldi.
"She thinks her husband is in Prague. But I spoke to him on the telephone 3 hours ago, and he was in Oxford. I'm afraid she's ill, very ill."
"Listen," said the doctor. "She had a bad hit on the head in the accident, but she didn't break anything, and her head is all right. We looked at it very carefully. She's going to be okay after a good sleep."
"But all this talk about Jan, her husband," said Mr. Rinaldi. "What about that?"
"Yes, she's confused about that, it's true. But she remembers her name, she knows you, and she understands that she's in hospital. All this is very good. Now, what about you, Mr. Rinaldi? It's a difficult time for you too, because of your concerts. I understand that. But please go away now. Eat something. Have a sleep. Then come back later this afternoon. You can't do anything now."
"All right," said Mr. Rinaldi. But he was not happy. "Poor Carol," he thought. "And my poor orchestra. How can I find another harpist before tonight's concert?"
Chapter 5. Some visitors for Carol. 2 hours later, a tall man arrived at the hospital. He asked to see the woman in yesterday's street accident. He didn't know her name. The doctor came downstairs. "Who are you?" she asked the man. "My name is Pavel Brichter. I saw the accident, and I called the ambulance. Is the woman all right? I just wanted to know that. I was afraid she was dead." The doctor smiled. "Would you like to see her? She's much better now." "Yes, please," answered Pavel. "Then come with me." They went upstairs in the lift and walked along to Carol's room. At the door they stopped and looked in through the window. "She's sleeping," said the doctor. "But she looks well," said Pavel. "Yesterday she looked so white. I was afraid for her." Just then, Carol opened her eyes and saw a man through the window in her door. She sat up. "Jan!" she shouted. "Jan!" "Oh dear," the doctor said. "Not again." "She hit her head in the accident, and she's confused about some things. She thinks that you are her husband from England."
"Shall I go?"
asked Pavel. "Perhaps it's better. Yes," answered the doctor. She went into Carol's room and closed the door. Pavel walked slowly back to the lift. Then the lift door opened and a man ran out with some beautiful red flowers in his arms. He looked at the numbers of the rooms and then went quickly into Carol's room. He didn't see Pavel, but an older man came slowly out of the lift next. He saw Pavel and stopped suddenly. Pavel stopped too.
"I'm sorry," said the old man. "My eyes aren't very good. I thought... You see, you look..."
"Yes, I know," said Pavel. "I saw your friend."
"He's not my friend. He's my son.
Please tell me, what is your name?"
"Pavel Brichter."
The old man looked very afraid. His face went white, and his mouth opened and closed, but he said nothing. Now Pavel was afraid. "You don't look very well," he said. "Would you like to sit down? And shall I call a doctor? There's a doctor in this room here."
"Please," said the old man. "My son is in that room. Please take me to him."
Pavel took the old man's arm. In Carol's room, Jan put the red flowers on the bed and took his wife's hands. "Oh, my love, are you all right?" he said. "I can't understand it. Why did you run in front of a bus? How did it happen?" Carol didn't answer his questions. "Jan?" She looked up into his face. "You are Jan? Tell me that you're Jan." "Of course I'm Jan. What are you talking about?" The doctor came up to the bed. "Wait a minute," she said. "You told me that your name was Pavel Brichter. Are you Mrs. Vlach's husband, or not?" Just then, Carol looked behind Jan. She saw Pavel with Jan's father through the window of her door. Her eyes got bigger and bigger. "Who is that?" she said. Jan and the doctor turned and saw Pavel. "My God," said Jan. "I don't know." The doctor looked back at Jan's face. "Two men, but only one face," she said quietly. Then Jan's father opened the door of Carol's room, and the two men came in. Jan stood up. He looked at his father. "Who is this man?" he asked.
"His name is Pavel Brichter," answered his father. "Please, bring me a chair and some water. I need to sit down before I can answer your question."
Jan got a chair for his father, and the doctor gave him some water. Then she left the room quietly. Chapter 6. Who is Pavel? The old man drank some water and looked up.
"Pavel," he said, "I must ask you to look at this photo."
He put his hand in his pocket and took out a photograph of a young woman.
"Do you know this woman?"
"Yes," said Pavel.
That's a photo of my mother, Lenka. She died when I was very young. But my grandmother had many photos of her, and we often looked at them. Did you live with your grandmother when you were young? Yes, I did. But how do you know all this? Because, said Joseph, Lenka was my wife. Dad, what are you saying? Said Jan. Joseph looked at Jan. My boy, don't be angry with me. I didn't tell you many things about your mother. Perhaps I was wrong, but I wanted to forget. Not to forget your mother, only to forget that terrible night in 1957. Jan, this man, Pavel, is your twin brother. You can see that it's true. Look at your faces. Pavel looked at Jan. So, I have a brother, he said. My grandmother never told me that. Jan smiled. And my father, our father, never told me about a twin brother. He turned to Joseph. Dad, why didn't you tell me? It's a long story, said the old man. It begins many years ago, when a young man went to Prague University. He was there for 7 years, and in his last year he met a beautiful young woman. His eyes turned to the photo. She was so beautiful. Of course, the young man fell in love with her, and they got married in 1956. But things were difficult in Prague then. People were not happy, and they were not free. Lenka and I, and a lot of our friends, wanted to change things. But it was dangerous work. The Russians knew about us, and they watched us all the time. Then you 2 boys were born on a wonderful day in June 1957. But you went away, Pavel said angrily. Your wife died, and you left the country. You went away to England and began a new life. You didn't write. You didn't telephone. You weren't interested in me, your son. Joseph's face was very sad. Pavel, he said, I thought you were dead. Look, I must show you something. From behind the photo of his wife, he took out a letter and gave it to Pavel. The letter was old and yellow. Pavel opened it and began to read. The letter was in Czech, and it was his grandmother's writing. I write to tell you, Joseph, that your wife is dead. On Christmas night, the guards shot her on the road at the border. She carried Pavel, your baby son, and my grandson, on her back, and the guards shot him too.
Your wife and your son are dead. Your friends came and told me yesterday. You have Jan and a new life in England. And what do I have? Nothing. You took one grandson away from me, and now my daughter and little Pavel are dead because of you. Don't write to me, and don't come back to Prague. I never want to see you or hear from you again. Stanislava. Slowly, Pavel put the letter down. I understand now, he said quietly. What a terrible letter. How could she do that to you? And to me? Stanislava loved her daughter very much, Joseph said sadly. She loved you too, and didn't want to lose you. I see that now. But she never liked me. And after that letter, how could I go back to Prague? You were dead. Lenka was dead. He put his face in his hands. The room was very quiet. Then Pavel put his hand on his father's arm. Stanislava is dead now, he said. You and I can begin again. He smiled. And learn to be father and son. Joseph's face was wet with tears. He put his hand over Pavel's hand and smiled back at him. But he could not speak. Now there were tears in everybody's eyes. After a minute or two, Jan said, Dad, I know it's difficult for you, but can you tell us about that Christmas in 1957? How did it all happen? I'd like to know. Yes, said his father. You and Pavel must know. He turned to Pavel. But what did Stanislava tell you? Very little, Pavel said. She never wanted to talk about it. She told me that my mother died in hospital, and you went away to England. That was all. I can understand that, said Joseph. Poor Stanislava. She lost her daughter because of me. And she never liked our work for freedom, you see. She didn't understand. She just wanted a quiet family life. Christmas, 1957, said Jan. Yes, said Joseph. In October and November of that year, things got more and more dangerous for Lenka and me. Our friends told us, leave before the Russians get you. Get away to Austria and then to England. We didn't want to leave Czechoslovakia, of course. It was our home. But we couldn't stay. Our friends helped us, and Jan and I got across the border on the day before Christmas, December the 24th. It was night. There was no moon, and we got to Austria all right, through the fields and the snow. But the next night— December the 25th, said Pavel.
My grandmother told me the day. My mother died in a hospital bed in Prague, she said. Lenka died in the snow, on the road at the border, Joseph said. She was so near Austria, so near us, with you, Pavel, on her back. The old man's voice stopped, and again he put his head in his hands.